The topic for today's episode is divorces in India. My first learning about this topic happened when I just started my search for a guest for this episode. I remember putting out a message on a few WhatsApp groups asking people if they knew a divorce lawyer I could get in touch with. And mind you, I did mention that this was for work. What followed was a flood of messages and calls from long-lost colleagues, family members, friends, and acquaintances, all checking in to see if everything was okay. This underscored the nature of divorces in India, which are not merely a legal proceeding, but rather a socio-legal process in our country. In today's episode, we will delve deeper into the complexities surrounding family dynamics, societal norms, and talk about the evolving legal landscape surrounding divorce in our country. My guest today is Astha Sharma, and she practices matrimonial and criminal law in the Supreme Court of India. She is also a partner with Acqui Law and heads the Delhi office. Hi Astha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Pooja.
So Astha, my first question to you is, I know you practice both matrimonial law and criminal law. So out of these two, which one do you find more twisted to deal with?
So yes, of course, people would say the criminal law is more complex. I personally feel that it's better to do a criminal matter any day because it's very clean in the sense that yehi hona hai. Whereas, in a matrimonial matter, it will be, the courts are more expected to maintain equities. That, both the parties should be happy. Can we find a medium way, which gets very messy, I'll say. So any day, criminal law, a criminal matter, any day for me over matrimonial matters.
No, I understand what you're getting at. It's very difficult to deal with people when you're trying to, manage egos and, talking about, a lot of subjectivity here.
True, because each party would say कि हम सही हैं. Nobody wants to admit कि गलती हमारी थी or it's because of us that the marriage is not working. So it becomes very difficult to manage that, like you said. And आजकल it's more about the ego game. People don't want the money, but they just want the other person to suffer because they feel that हमने suffer किया, so they should also do that. Which I guess gets very complex. People start washing their daughters' linen in courts, fights in courts. You don't know who's right, who's wrong. So, like I said, criminal matter any day over a matrimonial dispute.
Yeah. So, Astha, you mentioned that you're an advocate on record, which is AOR, and I did some research. I think AOR is the terminology that you use for all lawyers who can fight cases in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So I have two questions here. Number one, in my research, I learned that we have about 15 to 17 lakh lawyers in the country. And out of those many lawyers, we only have about 3,100 advocates on record. So my question to you is, number one, why do we have such a less number of AORs in the country? And number two, do you have a sense of the number of women or women percentage of these AORs?
So you're right that it's only the AORs who are eligible to file cases in the Supreme Court. So just because you've done law and you're enrolled with the Bar Council doesn't mean that you can come to the Supreme Court and fight a case. You have to take this exam, clear it, and it's only then that you become an AOR. We are very few in number one because the exam itself is very tough. Also because it's very easier for people to live in their own hometowns and practice. So not a lot of people want to leave that and come to Supreme Court, establish themselves completely. And then the papers are set up by senior advocates. They are the invigilators also. So the standards are very high. The Supreme Court expects कि हमारे पास case आया है. So the standards of the petition that have been drafted or the law that is involved is extremely high. So that's the reason why we have very few people who qualify it and become AORs. The percentage, I would say, has come up in the recent past. Initially, I would say that we were just about, say, 10% of the entire batch who were clear in a year. But of late, women are the ones who were taking this exam more and clearing it. In fact, as of last year, it was women for the first time, who topped the AOR exam. So, which is a good welcoming move. So, I think people are getting more attuned to, being in the Supreme Court and filing cases.
So how is fighting a court in the Supreme Court different from fighting it in, say, the lower courts of the country?
It is very different. a lot of people would say that if you haven't practiced in the lower court, you can't practice in the Supreme Court, because that's where you understand how to build a case, what all is required, kya documents file karne hai. So it's usually the lower court lawyers, trial court lawyers, who would strategize that if you've come with a problem, hame ye file karna hai ya aise file karna hai, what are the documents required, the kind of evidence that we can use. By the time it travels up to the Supreme Court, from 2-3 courts below, you have everything ready made for you. So we only have to use what is there before us to make a strategy. We can't make a new case out of the documents if it's not there, right? So there are times when the clients would come and say ki, ek aur kagaz tha agar hum laga dete. So but the courts by that time are like, you've already traveled through the years, why did you not use it before? So the resources are very limited and you have to build your case from there. So it's a very different practice. I personally find the Supreme Court is more tougher because you only get about 2-3 minutes on the initial day to convince the bench whether your case has merits or not, whereas in courts below you have detailed hearings, ghanta chalti hai, judge samajhta hai whether you have a good case or not. So there is a marked difference between the two practices.
So can you not present new evidence when you're fighting a case in the Supreme Court?
No, unless and until you can show that the reason why you could not present it before, there was XYZ grounds that I could not, even if I would have tried, I couldn't have produced this document. You can't, because the case has travelled with certain set of documents. So today to open the case again would mean that everything that has happened before gets undone. So usually courts don't entertain it.
So you can't put up a new strategy, basically using the same evidence that was presented before, you need to represent it in a way that convinces the judges that it should be in your favor. Okay, all right. So Astha, you're from a defense background. Your father was in the army, and like you mentioned, आपके दूर दराज के रिश्तेदारों में भी किसी ने law नहीं पढ़ा था. And not only did you decide to study law, you also decided to get into litigation, which is not very common, especially in women. In fact, I have a few lawyer friends, but all of them practice corporate law because that's like a safe place to be in.
True.
So what was your family reaction, and what was the reason that you decided to pursue a career in law?
So it sounds very filmy, but I remember when I was in school, we had these counseling sessions, class 8th, I guess. And the counselor gave us all a set of questions, and then she had like a 5 minutes chat with us, and she told me that basis your question, I think you can be a lawyer. I was very excited. I came home and I told my parents, and they just laughed it out, saying, "Acha, haan, because you talk a lot, na itna bolti ho, isliye bol diya hoga unhone." And they kind of brushed it aside. But I felt that whatever she said did make sense. I was interested in rights and duties, which you was studying in civics and all. So I tried researching, asking people or talking to people who knew, who could help me about it. And I just knew that even if I was a science student, law is what I wanted to do. And of course, defense background, nobody in the family had ever been to court. Forget about being a lawyer, koi case bhi nahi tha hamari family mein. So they did not take it very nicely. There were a lot of relatives who told my parents that वैसे इतना बोलती है, law भी करा दिया, अब तो बिल्कुल भी शादी नहीं होएगी. So that was of course the issue that they had. Then when I cleared my college, when I passed out and I joined litigation, it just became worse to the extent that she's so tall, taller than the natural, the height of women that you have. She's plus size, she talks so much, and she's a lawyer. अब तो भैया मतलब कैंची की तरह ज़बान चलती है, अब तो कुछ भी नहीं हो सकता है इसका, But I think by that time my parents had kind of accepted that this is what she wants to do, and they were okay with giving me my space, though it took time for them to understand what litigation is and what's the kind of work there is, Being from service background, my father initially would not understand why is she getting paid in cash. तुम ऐसा क्या काम कर रही हो, तुम्हें cash मिल रहा है, कहाँ से आया इतना cash घर पे? And then पापा fees है, clients pay in fees. I can't tell them, don't give me money, they're giving me money, and I will of course file my returns. Don't worry about it. Now he understands that some clients want to pay like that, and it's how you deal with all those situations. So it took some time, but they are attuned to all of this now.
So there is that adjustment curve.
There is. It has to be, Now that my husband's also in the army, so he also had those questions initially, but I think now we found our balance.
So do you get like weird looks, comments from your relatives? Because you're a divorce lawyer, तो जब आप जाते हो family gatherings में, events में, weird questions and weird comments.
Initially, yes. Now it's more about everybody thinks कि it's a freaky advice मिलेगी. You know, so everybody has a query of their own. Like, you know, if you're a doctor and you go to any social gathering, they're like, you know, हमारा सर दुख रहा है, पैर दुख रहा है, ये report देख लो. So it's something like that with lawyers also. Everybody is like, हमारा पुश्तैनी मकान है, उसका dispute चल रहा है, या you know, हमारी पड़ोसी की बेटी है, किसी के साथ भाग गई. So you know, everybody has a different set of query for you. And now they understand कि 15 साल से if she's doing this, then maybe कुछ तो आता ही होगा इसको, you know. So it's more like giving free advice without sharing papers, without sharing any information. They would not even tell me that it's about them.
Yeah.
You know, they would cook up a story. You know, हमारे पड़ोस में कोई है, उनका ऐसा चल रहा है. But they would want advice. So now they're more accepting because they understand that, oh, she's doing something good for herself. Initially, yes, it was very weird.
So when was your first brush with matrimonial law?
This was probably in 2011. I joined the profession in 2010, and I think 2011 early months was when my boss, who used to work with, gave me my first matrimonial matter, which was a transfer petition in the Supreme Court.
Okay. Yeah. So what was your learning from that case?
So see, transfer petitions are usually, you know, when somebody wants to transfer a case from one state to other, they come to Supreme Court saying that because I live here, the case has been filed somewhere else, उसको यहाँ से वहाँ transfer कराना है. So very, you know, no legal issues involved, just your convenience is looked at, you know, why it can't be here. So I started drafting a petition for somebody that my boss had as a client, and you know, since it was my first draft, I started using fancy words, thinking that, you know, oh my God, it's going to be one of the best drafts that I put out. And जब I sat with the client, I realized that the fancy words didn't really work with him, you know. And he comes from a background where he doesn't understand all of this. So it has to be very simple. Maybe the judge and I understand what I've written. He, as my client, has no clue what I've written. So my first learning was that keep it simple because your client needs to understand what you've written. That would have been my first learning.
So what was this episode that made you realize it has to be kept simple and understandable?
So I remember I had mentioned in the petition, Pooja, that the wife left the matrimonial home on her own accord. And while we are settling the draft, this client is sitting next to me and he's like, नहीं madam, accord में नहीं गई थी, वो तो item थी उसके पास में. And I looked at him कि is he for real, or you know, and I'm like, okay, मैं change कर देती हूँ उसको, you know. So I realized that the words that we use in common language is how people understand it. So that is when it hit me कि नहीं, you can't be fancy with your language in court. It has to be simple. That was probably my biggest learning.
So what's the craziest divorce reason or story that you've dealt with?
So the craziest divorce reason would be probably one of the stories where a dog's custody was involved. So the husband had always had dogs at home. The wife did not like dogs at all, and this was something that they knew before they got married. And a few months into the marriage, the husband says, now I want to have a pet because I've always had a pet. And the woman would just freak out and say, no, I'm not going to allow you to have a pet. And the husband started going into depression because probably it was a comfort factor for him. And you know, he would just keep himself aloof, not talk to his wife at all. And the wife came to me saying that I want to separate. I said, why? Because he loves the dog more than he loves me. And it wasn't that big an issue, but you know, in the first instance, ये क्या बात हुई? You know, you can talk about it, you can sort out these things, but you understand that it's very fundamental to, you know, who they are as people. And the dog was not the issue. The issue was that, you know, they could not find time to sit together and communicate. The issue was that they just felt that both of them were right in their own ways. You know, they couldn't find probably a medium ground. And they filed for a divorce within a year and a half of their marriage. Because
so they did go through with it?
They did go through with it, but it was a mutual divorce. And it just felt very, very unfortunate, I would say, because it was something that they knew beforehand. And they could have just they could have just saved all this time that they wasted, right? Investing into a marriage, you know, changing their lives, only to realize that a dog was in the middle of all of this. So, yeah.
So, Astha, since you deal with so many clients who are going through such a tough period, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges people face when they're navigating something as serious as a divorce?
Pooja, I think the biggest challenge that I have personally seen people facing is to accept that your marriage is broken down. You know, because a lot of people still think कि चला लेते हैं, हो जाएगा, you know, लड़ाई झगड़ा है, normal है. they don't understand that things have reached to a point where you two can't live together as a couple. You need to move on. So that acceptance is the biggest thing. You know, even when people come to us for advice, saying that they're facing issues, they don't want to separate. They want to understand if they have any other option, which there is none. You know, because आप पिछले 4-5 साल से evidence इकट्ठा कर रहे हो एक दूसरे के खिलाफ, you know, every WhatsApp message, every email, every voice note has been saved by you, which shows that the marriage is already broken down. Now the final step of accepting it and now deciding what you need to do in life is what is required. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Of course, society has a very major role to play. The moment you tell your friend, yaar, मेरे को issues है, you know, marriage में, they say, हाँ हाँ हो जाएगा, solve हो जाएगा. You know, nobody tells you that it is okay to separate. You know, because we come from a society where everybody thinks कि बात कर लो, देख लो, हो जाएगा. You know, nobody understands that if somebody is taking that step, they've thought about it. They have taken their time, and you should be more okay with them expressing themselves rather than just putting them down saying, कुछ नहीं होता यार, माइनर लड़ाई है, ठीक हो जाएगा. With friends, family alike, I think that's the biggest challenge that couples face. But people don't accept that they want to move on.
But don't you think in a way it's good also that we live in a society that still values marriages? Because in our culture, you know, Hinduism mein marriages are sacrosanct.
True.
They're sacred.
So I probably am the last person who will tell you to separate. You know, if you come to me as a client, after hearing whatever you have to say, I will be the first person to say that think about it, you know, or get your family involved, get your friends involved, go to a counselor, a third party, because think about where you've come from. But I also feel that, you know, when you have your family and friends telling you constantly, you start doubting whether are they taking my side, are they taking my friends, you know, my spouse's side, दोस्त तो मेरे हैं, you know, मेरी बात क्यों नहीं समझ रहे हैं, या मेरी family है, why are they not standing with me? So I feel that all of these issues also start creating a self-doubt कि गलती मेरी तो नहीं थी, you know, even when you know you're not at fault. So while your family, your friends want you to save your marriage, they do you more damage. So if there is an occasion where you want help, take professional help, because they'll be very subjective. This is right, this is wrong, this is what you have. Instead of going with people or, you know, just googling it कि मैं Google करके मुझे पता लग जाएगा मुझे क्या करना है. Don't do that. Don't do that with yourself. That is what I would say.
So Astha, I came across this statistic that said that in the last 2 decades there has been an increase of 350% in divorce rates in India. But even after all this increase, the divorce rate in the country still sits at 1%. So is this correct?
So it's correct that there has been an increase in the divorce rate, filing of divorces, I would say, not divorce rates, because a lot of people today understand that bas ab nahi hai, let's move on, get divorced. The statistics that the rate is at 1% is only because the process is so long. Aapne aaj file kiya, it will take you about 5-7 years to finally reach that place where you granted a divorce. So that's why the final figure is very low. But yes, people have started filing more cases, separating more. The end result is a little delayed, is what I'll say.
Do you think this increase in filing is more in urban India in comparison to rural India?
So yeah, I would say that there is a more chance of people filing for divorce in the urban areas. Why? Because one, people are living separately from their families, so there is no societal pressure as such. Second, people are more independent financially, both the husband and wife are working. And third, the entire concept of log kya kahenge is not there, because, you know, aajkal nobody cares aapke neighbors kya kar rahe hain, you know, so that pressure is not there. Whereas if you go to smaller towns, cities, or, you know, even villages for that matter, everyone knows your business, right? So when people see or hear that you're having differences, आस-पास के लोग आएंगे, बिठाएंगे, समझाएंगे, या the whole idea कि यार मोहल्ले में लोग क्या कहेंगे, that is still very much prevalent, you know. So लोग वो दबा देते हैं बात, अच्छा लड़ाई हुई है, कुछ दिन मायके चले जाओ, you know, अच्छा छुट्टी चले जाओ. So all of those things are still there. Divorce is the last thing on anyone's mind, whereas that's not the same in the urban areas, you know. Courts are more accessible, people are more educated in the sense that, you know, they know what means they can use to achieve that end result. So I think that shift is there between urban and rural areas for that matter.
So Astha, I understand, you know, where you're coming from, and you know, when you said that society kind of creates a stigma around this subject, and because of which people continue to stay in toxic relationships. But in India, especially Hindu marriages, it's considered sacred, sacrosanct. And I also believe that every relationship, including that of a husband and wife, needs some sort of adjustment. Just like between a parent and a child, so on and so forth. So in that sense, do you think society plays a negative role or a positive role by encouraging people to talk it out, resolve matters, mediate, reconcile?
So see, a lot of people have good intentions when they interfere, right? They just don't know when to stop. Be it your family, immediate family, if they see that the couple is not happy, they will counsel you, give you options, try to solve it out for you. Your friends who know both of you as two individuals will also try to weigh in. But after a certain point in time, they will start taking sides, right? It's but natural, wherever we say that, अरे हम तो बेटी लेके आए अपने घर में, but if there is a difference, the mother or the father of the husband will always take his side. It's only very rare that they will say कि नहीं, you are wrong, बहू सही है. So that's always there, and it's very natural because अपना खून होता है, and they know कि आप कैसे बड़े हुए हो, आपके संस्कार क्या हैं, how we've raised you for that matter. So the parents would navigate towards their own child. Similarly, a friend, a friend might know you as a couple for the last 10 years, but still he or she was one person's friend first, right? So कहीं ना कहीं जाकर के वो division आएगा ही आएगा. So people need to understand that whatever we had to offer as advice हमने दे दी है. Ultimately you have to decide for your own self. So when you feel that all of these advices are not helping you, that's when I feel the society or your close circle should step back, let the two of you take a decision on your own, and maybe that's the time when a professional counselor should step in.
So you have a neutral opinion on the matter.
Yes, because at times issues that I might feel that there are issues in the family because of the way my household has always been, right? For a third party that might be very trivial, and when I hear that opinion, I'm like, yes, maybe he's right, But I have never had an informed choice because I've always been like that, हमारे यहाँ तो ऐसे ही होता है. So that concept kind of changes if you have a third party or a neutral party hearing you. So there is a time when your circle has to move back and let you take professional help for that matter. I still feel the society does it with good intention. जोड़ी बनी है बना के रखते हैं. But where it starts coming in from the point of view that लड़की की डोली गई है, अर्थी ही वापस आएगी, वापस घर मत आना, डिवोर्स करके मत आना, या अभी तो गई थी वापस आ गई है. All that mentality needs to change because then women feel kind of restricted in coming back to their own house.
Yeah, they feel trapped in relationships.
Yes, and they can't even express that to anyone because of these societal norms कि भैया वापस नहीं आना, या अभी तो गई थी, अरे अभी घर पे पड़ी है, एक महीने से आई है, दामाद तो नहीं आया यहाँ पे. So all of those things which people say may unintentionally kind of hints or pinches you, which kind of breaks the marriage down further. So all of that I believe can be avoided.
I think you made a very interesting statement, and I've heard it too, wherein the father of the girl tells that आपकी डोली जा रही है, अब अर्थी ही उठेगी. So in that sense, I want to understand that the number of petitions that you see happening, not just in your own practice, but with other divorce lawyers also. Are women approaching or filing for cases more, or is it happening more from the men's side?
So see, the recent trend has been that women have been more acceptable, that it's not working out. And it's not coming from a place where they feel that we are financially independent, we don't need to take anyone's nonsense, and we can survive independently. But it's coming from a place where they have understood their worth, that this is not normal, right? If he's shouting at me after a day at work, I have also come back from office and I don't deserve this. So they understand that at times, you have to give in your 80%, 100%. When people say that marriage is about giving equally, no, it's not. It's about one partner giving an 80% today because they know the other person needs to be pulled up, right? So women understand that, I can't be all giving. I have done my best. I can't survive and I need for my own mental peace to move out of this relationship. And I think that acceptance is the reason why women are, owing up to filing divorces. I won't say that there are not, there are no false cases. A lot of women have resorted to that as well. But I feel mostly it's because women wants to, they want to move out of the toxic relationship. That's the reason. It's not about, oh, I can manage my own self. It's not an ego issue. It's about understanding your self-worth.
But do you also feel with the way our society has evolved over the last decade or two, people's patience has gone down and people are not, looking towards maybe mediation or adjusting? And do you come across cases where you feel like, it's just a frivolous reason? Maybe if they just sat down together and spoke to each other, had a heart-to-heart conversation, they could have easily resolved.
I think yes, because we have households where both partners are working nowadays, right? So it's not that you have that time or the opportunity to sit and talk for long hours. Both of you have long working hours. You come home, you eat, and then you sleep. Or you go meet people, you come back, and then you crash for the night. So people stop taking out time for their partners. And something as small as, I came home early, why were you not here? Or, this entire week you haven't been home on time. Or, oh, we haven't gone on a vacation. Or, your mother has come in, with us the last two months. She's not leaving and you're not at home. Issues like these could easily be solved if you sit together and talk about it. That's not happening, and they kind of start piling up to an extent where it's like, ab nahi hoga. So that can be avoided easily if people talk. The first thing we do when people come to us is ask them that, have you tried mediation? Have you tried sitting with the person and talking to them? Because it's just not about separating and moving on. It's also about saving something that was very precious to you at one point in time, right? If it can be saved, why not? Right? Because there was love. Even if you stay with the roommate in college for 2-3 years, there is natural love and affection. So, a partner you share much more. So it can't be that things have, all of a sudden come to a point where you don't want to live with that person. So if there's an underlying cause, if there has been physical abuse, if there has been mental abuse, we never advise all of this because these are things that you can't go back to. But if it's something like a communication gap, adjustment issues, then as lawyers also, most of us try that, if parties can sit together and work it out. And I think that's a great thing to do.
So how does the family structure that we have in India, where still in large part people live in joint family setups, influence couples' relationships? And I'm not talking about the family's influence on whether to go ahead with divorce, but I'm talking about how it impacts a couple's relationship.
It does to a very large extent, because people have this notion that there are more divorces in arranged marriage because you don't know the person, whereas I find it's the opposite, because in love marriages there are more divorces. Why? Because you know that single person that you've been dating for all these years, right? The moment the family comes in, everything changes. You don't know how your partner was with his or her mother or how she was being treated at home. And when you get into a new setup where your partner is with the family also, you start expecting the same things which you expect in your own household, right? And then you start seeing your partner in a very different picture because you never seen them like that ever before, right? So that kind of plays a very big role, and people can't adjust to that. It takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of love for that matter to want to stay in that marriage and to make it work. So we see that people even after 7-8 years of dating don't make it through the first year of marriage. Is why? Because living together without families and then being with the families for simple thing is husband का birthday है, आपने मम्मी को phone नहीं किया. क्यों नहीं किया? अरे birthday इसका है, why will I call that person? But the mother expects कि यार मुझे भी तो phone करो ना, मेरे बेटे का birthday है. Because that's how our families have been. Like my mama would call up my buआ to wish her for her daughter's birthday. That's the mentality, or that's how we've all grown up. So, and that still stays. But we are not used to it. For us, it's my husband's birthday, I will wish him and we'll move on, we'll celebrate with friends. We never picture in कि अच्छा उनसे भी बात करनी है. But that's something that comes in later on, and that's something that will get adjusted to with time, probably.
So, in your practice of 14-15 years so far, what are the top 3 reasons or 4 reasons that you see for couples filing for divorce? And are these reasons the same for both men and women?
So I'd say the top reasons, Pooja, would be cruelty beats anything, right? Cruelty is top there for women when they file for
So
divorces.
it's both physical harassment and
Yes.
mental
So
harassment.
cruelty would include both physical and mental. Initially, the courts only spoke about domestic violence or if there was physical abuse. But of late, they've understood that yes, harassment also means mental harassment. Harassment would also, or cruelty would also, for that matter, mean, passing rude comments or being sarcastic or, body shaming somebody or, constantly finding faults with something that someone is doing. All of those taunts would also include, in cruelty, which it took time for courts to understand. They were like, "It's normal hai, bola hi to hai." But to understand that how those regular taunts figure out in somebody's life and how it impacts them mentally is also something that's coming up now, and courts are recognizing it for that matter. Adultery, again, is one of the top reasons why people get divorced. Infidelity, impotency, infertility, all of these issues are what, are the top reasons why people choose to separate.
And it's the same for both men and women.
So, Pooja, I think women in our country, or even men for that matter, don't use adultery as a ground, because it's very difficult to prove it in the sense that when a woman files a case on the ground for adultery, she would have to make that person that your husband's having an affair with also a party, the one that we call an adulterer. So, first you need to know that who that person is. Second, you also need to have proofs to show that yes, they were in a relationship outside marriage. And the threshold of proving this in the court is extremely high. So people would rather resort to something like cruelty because it's easier to prove. How the court interprets a WhatsApp message or a voice note can always be interpreted, in the sense that if you and I are having a conversation, hum aaram se baat kar rahe hain, I will first instigate you. And then I start recording it from the point where you start shouting at me, right? And that becomes my evidence. That see, look at the filthy and foul language that she is using. So that's easier to prove, right? Rather than going and following somebody, आप एक investigator लगाते हो, withdrawals कहाँ हुए हैं, कौन से hotel में check-in हो रहा है, that's very difficult. So people resort to cruelty because it's just easier to prove. Yes.
But can a couple who's going through a divorce proceeding see other people while they're in the middle of divorce?
So no, that's I think one of the largest myth people have, that since we have filed for divorce, we are single. No, you're not. You're still legally married. It'll take time for you to finally go through all the stages and finally have a court order which says that you are separated. So you can't officially date anybody, you can't have a live-in relationship with someone, you can't also go ahead and marry somebody only because you filed for divorce.
But how does that impact their divorce proceeding if somebody is dating and they're in the middle of a divorce proceeding? So how does that impact their divorce proceeding, alimony, other settlements?
So see, impact will also depend on the reasons for the divorce. Suppose a wife has filed a case for divorce saying that my husband has always been belittling me, that I don't earn, or I don't look pretty, or I haven't gotten enough dowry, etc., etc. And this man, while the divorce proceedings are going on, is with somebody who's more educated, who's more traveled, who's better looking, then of course those will be considered that this was the reason why he wanted me out of the house. And look, he's with somebody else, who's all those things that he said that I wasn't, right? So वो हमेशा से रहेगा. Even with alimony, etc., you're not paying me as a wife saying that, oh, I don't have finances, but you have finances to wine and dine somebody else, or you have the money to travel abroad with somebody else. So, all of these factors then are considered by the court. So, see, matrimonial matters are a mudslinging fest. People will wash their dirty linen in public. Things like your Instagram profile, your pictures with random people, even if you're going out with friends, you've put your arm around another girl, the wife will put those pictures, you know, or if you're on Bumble or Tinder and somebody finds out that you are, वो सब screenshots आएंगे ही आएंगे court में, you know, and then it's like I was not doing this, but I was doing this, or I was not on, you know, I had gone out with friends, it was somebody's birthday. You have to then justify things which you would not in your normal life. So it just comes to a point where people start using all of these tools, etc., which just makes it very, very awkward. You know, as a lawyer also, you're like, नहीं ज़रूरत है, नहीं करते हैं, but people by that time have reached that threshold कि नहीं अब बस नहीं हो रहा है हमसे, and we will use any means to, you know, probably malign somebody. So it's advised, best advice, that, you know, you don't be with anybody, you're not dating anybody, especially not living in with someone. And you know, even if you are in a relationship, which most people do nowadays, you know, you can't stop anybody, please keep it under wraps. Don't put it out on social media. You know, don't be traveling abroad, you know, where your other spouse gets to know about it. And be fair to the spouse. You know, if she or he is not earning well and you're you know, going for these fancy holidays outside, be reasonable, give them some money as well. You know, the equities then have to be maintained in that regard. Yeah.
So how is alimony decided in these cases?
So see, we, as per law, we have a very simple system where the courts ask both the parties, husband and wife, to file what we call an income affidavit.
Okay.
Right? This is mandatory as per law. Supreme Court's judgment came out on this issue. And they said that for the last 3 years, you know, before separation, please file your ITRs. Also give details like what's your educational qualification, what are the funds that you have in your account, what are the investments that you have made, the properties that you have either individually or as, you know, in your joint name. What are your expenditures in terms of, you know, if a wife has left a matrimonial home, if you're living separately, your house rent, you know, your monthly expenses, or if there's a kid involved, the school expenditures, etc. So that's a very detailed affidavit that both parties have to file. Basis that, the court sees that, you know, oh, if you're earning, that component goes, or, you know, if you're already receiving an XYZ amount from say rental income, etc., etc. So then the court maintains equities in the sense that, you know, the wife should also not be wanting, and the husband should also not be paying through the roof, even when the wife is educated and she can work. Because a lot of times we see that, you know, even if the girl is educated, she was working, she would leave her job and then file for divorce and maintenance for that matter. So the courts understand कि अगर आप पहले काम कर रहे थे तो आपने क्यों छोड़ा? So that's why it's a longer period, you know, 3 years before the marriage, or, you know, 3 years before the separation. So the courts want to see if you were working all throughout, आपने अभी काम छोड़ा है, that shows that it's not a genuine cause. Right? So all of that the court sees and then grants.
So is there an upper limit on the amount of alimony that needs to be granted?
No, it would depend on the kind of lifestyle that you led as a couple. The kind of you know, background that you come from. Suppose you come from a super filthy rich family, for that matter, you know, if you've heard in the news, Suzanne Khan asked for 400 crores from Hrithik Roshan when they divorced. She finally settled on 100 crores, right? So it's about the kind of background you have, the kind of money you have as a couple, and what the wife knows that you have. But ultimately, the law says that you have to be maintained to a standard of living that you had while you were married, or while you were living together. You know, so if a wife, for the matter, comes and say that, you know, oh, I also had a membership to a club, or, you know, I used to go for tennis or horse riding, or this was something that was part of my routine, then the husband will have to provide for that also. You know, he can't say that I will only give you ghar ka kharcha, I will give you rent, or I will just give you mahine ka itna paisa, and that's just about it. Waisa nahi chalega. It's about what you had, what you were used to, and if the husband can maintain the same lifestyle. Of course, you know, if the husband has losses in business, he can't maintain you in the same standard. He won't have been able to do that even when you were married, right? Agar usko loss hua hai business mein, so your standard of living would come down, right? As a couple also. So the courts look at all of those situations.
But you have to disclose everything.
Yes.
Are there cases where people try to conceal their income also?
Yes. So most of the time you will see that in the first instance, nobody files their income affidavits. It's only after 2 or 3 orders of the court that they would file it, because nobody wants to disclose it. Or what they would do is that they would transfer some properties in name of their mothers or, you know, sisters, so that they show that we don't have anything for that matter. Like I said, women would leave their jobs, that they show that, you know, we're not filing ITRs. So a lot of people try, if they're using it as a means to, you know, harass somebody, कि परेशान करना है, पैसा लेना है, they will do it. And there have been instances for that matter.
So Astha, you also spoke about, you know, the court also looks at the education level of the woman and the man, just to check if
Yeah.
they're employable and they can work and make a living for themselves. So my question is, let's say there's a woman who used to work and then, after a while they have a kid and the woman decides to step back. But she's of course employable. She can go out and make a living on her own. But a few years later, maybe they decide to, part ways, the husband and wife. And at that point in time, the woman is not working. So then how does the alimony work out? Does the court say that, you should go back to work because you used to work earlier, but now the reason is
So
different?
see, the court understands that even if she goes back to work right now, she can't pick up from where she was, right? In the sense that her CV will have that 5-year gap. Right? 3 years, 5 years, whatever she took off to take care of the kid. So the courts understand that also. Suppose if I was working at a post where I was a manager or I was a team leader, I was a vice president and I was drawing X amount of salary. To take care of my family, I leave my work. I go back after 5 years. I will not be appointed a vice president right away, right? I'll still have to take a step back and start from a lower, managerial role and then make my way up again. So, the courts also look at this from the point of view that a young mother is not employable in the sense that she needs to go back to the kid, she needs to go to the daycare to pick up the kid, or she might not be available on days when she doesn't have any help at home. So all of those factors also are considered by courts. They are cognizant of all of that, and accordingly the court then grants alimony or maintenance for that matter, because these are factors that you don't consider when you're a male. Employee. People would hire you. Even if you're a young father, people would hire you, right? Which is not the same for a mother, right? So the courts do consider all of that.
Yeah. So, we spoke about kids and how it impacts alimony and everything. Another thing, and I think a very important role that children play in the whole, dynamics is a lot of people staying in toxic relationships, marriages, so that, they can maybe somehow preserve their children's childhood. So what is your take on that?
I think I don't agree with this at all. When we do get a client, when there's a child involved, see, first of all, we need to understand that the children are the most affected party in a divorce. No matter what, even if it's an amicable divorce, it would be a change for them, which as parents or as mature adults, we don't understand. So they're the ones about whom we need to think twice over. But you also need to understand that children are very, very intuitive.
Yeah.
So if you're in an unhappy home, they see their parents fighting every day. They see that, oh, their dadi and nani, are taunting the parents, or, there's a constant toxic environment at home. They pick at all of that, right? So when you stay in a marriage because there is a kid involved, you're ruining the child's childhood is what my personal experience has been, right? You're not doing anything to preserve the child's childhood. Rather than having one unhappy home where the child is scared to even talk about, what happened in school, or I had a fight with my friend, have to separate happy homes, right? The child would know that this is my time with my mother's side of the family, this is my time with my father and his side of the family. I can go out, do X activities with my father. When I'm with my mother, we can do this. And it's a safe environment for him in two houses, rather than an unsafe environment. Because suppose what happens if there's a domestic violence incident going on, one party hurls a shoe at somebody, the child can get hit.
Yeah.
And then you can just be sorry about
And
it.
not just that, I think it's traumatic
It
for
is,
life.
just to see, to even see, or even if you're in the other room, you hear your parents shout and fight. And it happens in all households, let me tell you, we, even if, I'm with my husband, I've had a bad day, he would ask me a simple question and there would be times when I would snap at him. I would raise my voice and my mother from the other room would message me saying, why are you guys fighting? And I think we're not fighting, it's just, I'm just, venting out my anger, so don't worry about it. But imagine a child in the situation, he will not understand all of this, which probably my mother understands, or my husband's also like, theek hai, abhi chillaegi, theek ho jayegi, then we'll sit and talk about it, it's not, she's not angry at me, she's angry at somebody at work and she's saying you're on me. A child will never understand that, right? So you're putting the child through a very traumatic experience, and just to save his childhood, you're kind of ruining it all for him.
Yeah.
So
So both for the couple and for the child.
Yes.
So I think nobody's gaining anything out of this sort of a marriage. So Astha, in the last few years, I know a lot of changes have been made in the legal landscape, especially surrounding divorces. For instance, adultery was decriminalized a few years ago. So apart from that, what sort of other changes has this area seen in India the last few years?
So I think the major change has not been a legal change, but a change in the perspective in which the courts see a divorce proceeding, in the sense that initially it was always that aadmi ki galti hai. That was the mindset in which all of us approached these matters, and whatever the women said was the gospel truth, which I believe has kind of considerably changed in the last decade or so, where the courts, the judges, the lawyers for that matter, understand that it takes two to break a marriage, right? So even if, yes, one party would have been the aggressor, the other one has, suffered through it, it's not that it's always the men's fault. Right? So that is a shift that we've seen. We've also seen shifts in the sense where the women who are independent and working and earning much more have had to pay, maintenance or alimony to their respective husbands, which is also something that was unheard of, a few years ago. So those are the kind of shifts that we've seen in the perspective of the courts while dealing with these matters, where to maintain equities, the rights of the husbands are also being treated equal. For that matter, when we consider that mother is a natural guardian, but today the courts also say that because a husband and wife have had differences, that does not make husband a bad father, right? So he still has the right to visit the child, right to custody. So all of those shifts in the perception of court and the lawyers have been there in the last few years. That's where we've seen a major shift.
No, I also read something about custody while doing up some research that said that if you have a child involved and the child is under 5 years of age, so naturally, and it goes to the mother. So is it true?
It is true. Unless and until the husband can then prove that she's an unfit mother, and unfit in the sense that she's not feeding the child, or she's beating the child who's in his custody, her custody, sorry, or for that matter, that she's started working again, she goes for trips abroad, but she leaves the kids with not relatives but with nannies for days at end, while I can take care of the child more. So all of those issues are still there. Or if there are instances where the kind of food that the mother is giving is not healthy for the child, or the child has undergone a lot of surgeries at a very young age.
Really?
So if you can prove that the mother is an unfit mother, then the courts in a lot of cases have granted the custody of a minor child, below the age of 5, also to the father.
Okay.
But usually they say that if you're a minor child, mother is the best person.
So Astha, whenever you have a client who approaches you for a divorce proceeding, what is your first course of action or first piece of advice to that person?
So Pooja, my first piece of advice would always be that if you can sort this out amicably, one, whether are you at the stage where you want to separate, right? Because a lot of people are only coming to us to know what their options are. They don't want to officially separate. They just want to know that if things get worse, what are our options? In terms of do we get residence? Do we get money? Do we get money for education of our children? They just want to explore their options. So the first thing that we do as lawyers is to understand whether they're at that position where they want to file for a divorce. If they want to, then again our first choice would be that is there a possibility to mutually and amicably part ways, because like I said, it's a mudslinging fest. You say something, the other party would read it, say ये तो सब झूठा लिखा है इन्होंने, ऐसे तो कुछ भी नहीं हुआ था हमारी शादी में, and then they would file something, and then you would get angry, अरे उसने ऐसे कैसे लिख दिया, I took them out for a holiday also, हम तो internationally भी घूम के आए. So the more you get into a matrimonial proceedings, more egos are hurt. You read about things on paper which you felt as a couple were very normal things to do. So the first thing would be that, let's solve this amicably. If it's about money, what do you want? Are you looking for, a certain amount of money to dissolve this marriage? Or are there household articles, the stridhan that you got, or the jewelry that you got from the in-laws, etc. So that's the first advice, that, is there a possibility to separate?
But does the law also have any provisions that provide for mediation between the couple?
It does. So all the family courts where you file for divorces in India, all of them have their designated counselors.
Okay.
And it's always advised to go to these counselors because a lot of issues can be resolved. Of course, unless, there has been instances of domestic abuse or physical abuse for that matter. Amicably resolving these issues are the first thing that we'll always tell somebody. So, yeah.
We spoke about how divorce is a very long proceeding.
Yes.
So I think it takes anywhere between 5 to 7 years, you said.
Yes, minimum.
Right? So 5-7 साल तक आपका alimony decide नहीं हुआ है, but let's say if the woman is a homemaker or there's a huge gap between the husband's income and the
And her,
wife's
yeah.
income. So during those 5-7 years, while the court case is being dragged,
Yeah.
how does the wife sustain herself?
So there's a provision, Pooja, for interim maintenance.
Okay.
So what we usually do is when we file for maintenance for a wife or for a husband, if he's economically weaker, we file an application for interim maintenance also. So
Okay.
we'll give a breakdown of this is the amount the wife or the husband needs on a monthly basis. But till the time you can decide whether she or he deserves that amount, please give them an interim maintenance of XYZ amount. Suppose if I have drawn, say, an expenditure of 90,000 a month, which includes everything, the courts can then hear me on interim, see what the other party is earning without going into my educational background, etc., etc., and say that yes, she is living separately. She doesn't have a house to live in. At least the rental income, and say 20,000-30,000 a month you have to transfer. So instead of the 90 that I've asked for, probably 35-40 I will get.
Okay.
So the courts try to balance equities in that sense. Yeah.
So let's assume that there was this interim maintenance that was allowed or given to a woman,
Yeah.
and the court case was dragged on for say 5-7 years, and at the end of the verdict, it was decided that the woman shouldn't be getting any alimony. So then what happens to the interim maintenance? Is she supposed to refund?
Well, it will depend on why the maintenance was rejected. In the sense that she got interim maintenance because she wasn't working. But in the intervening period, say in the 5-7 years, she starts working and now she's earning, right? So the grounds for which the interim maintenance was given to her has changed. However, the money that she has used was at the time when she was not getting anything, right? So the courts won't ask you to refund anything.
Okay.
However, probably if you've used, fake or forged documents, or you've not put correct picture on the paper in the sense that you're educated, that you told the court that no, I've only studied till say XYZ class and I can't earn anything. And if the other party can then prove that you've filed false affidavits in court, then the court can take a strict view and ask you to refund the amount, which has happened.
Okay.
But that's a very strict view because interim maintenance is to tide you through the times today, right? So if the situation changes, then more than not that money will be adjusted, and refund is the last resort unless and until you prove कि हाँ जी कुछ गड़बड़ी हुई थी or because of XYZ reason it had to be given back.
Okay. So Astha, typically what percentage of divorce cases get withdrawn or dissolved due to successful mediation?
So Pooja, mediation would be of two kinds then. Mediations which are successful in solving the issues between the parties, where parties decide what financial distributions have to be there, and then they separate their ways, right? That's one kind of mediation. So the other kind would then be that the parties realize that there is no conflict between them and they want to live together. So there are more chances of a mediation resulting into the parties separating mutually and the alimony etc. being decided by the mediator. It's very minuscule chance of people wanting to live together at that stage. And I would suggest, probably in my experience, it would be about 30 to 35% cases that go to mediation, they do get resolved in the sense that parties want to then amicably, separate. Yeah.
So do we also have legal aid programs in India?
We do. So most of the courts provide for legal aid because under the constitution, everybody has the right to a lawyer.
Okay.
Right? We usually say that it's for the accused person, but technically you have a right to legal aid in the sense that you can't go unrepresented in court, right? So if you come to the court, you apply saying that I don't have the financial means to engage a lawyer on my own, the court is obligated to provide you a lawyer.
Okay.
So now there are different schemes in different courts. For example, in the Supreme Court, you have a Supreme Court Legal Services Committee, and there are certain criteria that, if you're from the SC/ST community, or if you earn, say, less than 5 lakhs a year, or if you're a woman or a child, or if you're a rape victim, for that matter, but you're earning well, but now you're a victim of a sexual offense crime. So all of those categories can be considered as the ones who make you eligible for legal aid, and you only have to give an application to that committee, and then they assign you a lawyer from court who would do all your legal work for free. So that's the kind of provisions that the law provides.
So Astha, my last question to you is this. Again, I know we spoke about earlier also that mediation, counseling and everything, but one piece of advice to anybody who's going through a tough relationship, what would that be?
My advice would be to communicate. You know, unless and until you talk amongst yourselves, you would not really know what the issue is. You would think we know everything, but it's not true. Just sit and talk to that person. You know, you've decided to spend your entire lives together.
Yeah.
10 more minutes not going to change anything. It might just save your marriage. And if you finally decide that, you know, it's not making our marriage work, or, you know, we can't continue with this, do not Google for help. You know, go to a professional. We might be able to guide you better, you know, in the sense. And things can be then taken care of in a very smooth manner, rather than this entire, oh, let me hire an investigator, let me, you know, put a tap on her phone. Avoid all of that, you know. There was love once. Have the dignity to move on with some self-respect. Unless and until, like I said, it's a case of physical violence, you know, where there is no dignity left, you know. So think about the good times, even while you're parting, so that, you know, you can just move on with your life separately, instead of making it so murky that tomorrow, if you're in the same circles, you can't even, you know, face each other. That would be my advice.
So communicate. You know, if you can't resolve it at your own end, then maybe resort to an external counselor.
Yes.
Not a family or a friend, because they tend to take sides. And the third step would be to, you know, consult a divorce lawyer.
And mutually separate ways. You know, the moment you think that I'm going to contest it, it's just going to get
nasty and dirty.
And, you know, people might think today that, oh, I can face anything. But like I said, it takes about 5-7 years. By the end of the 5th year, you'll be like, why am I doing this with my life? You know, and by that time, you've said so much that even that mutual divorce then takes a back seat, right? So just see if you can mutually part ways. That's probably the best thing there is.
Thank you, Astha. Thank you so much for your time. I know this is a very difficult period in anybody's life, and in India, divorce continues to be, you know, a taboo. People don't want to talk about it. And while I hope nobody has to go through it, I'm sure that, you know, if anybody is going through a rough time, they would certainly find value in this episode. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Pooja. Thank you for having me.